A blistering desert wind swept across the firing range, carrying the sting of sand against the skin of the soldiers who lined up in silence. The challenge had been simple in words, but near impossible in execution. Hit a steel target nearly 3 miles away. 15 men had stepped up, 15 had failed. Even the most confident marksmen among the Marines and SAS had missed, their bullets scattering into the horizon. The range officer, voice tight with frustration, barked, "Any snipers here?" His tone wasn't a question anymore. It was ridicule echoing over the quiet of the valley. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably, some laughing, some shaking their heads, the heat pressing down on them like a second weight. From the back of the group, a quiet figure moved forward. She wasn't one of the loud, chest-thumping types that usually volunteered for such impossible shots. She was smaller, younger, a corporal who had earned respect quietly but never sought the spotlight. Her boots crunched in the dust as she walked, calm and deliberate. The soldiers whispered, some smirking, others raising brows. The range officer tilted his head in disbelief. "You? You think you can make that shot?" She didn't answer. She simply adjusted the strap on her Barrett M82 rifle, a weapon so large and heavy that a few of the men nearby doubted she could handle the recoil. She had modified it herself, with the patience of a craftsman, tuning the scope, balancing the bipod, learning every inch of its steel like a pianist knows their keys. Quick pause! Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. The whispers grew louder. Someone muttered about how Chris Kyle, the legendary Navy SEAL sniper, had proven himself in combat, and Craig Harrison of the British Army had set records with shots over 2 kilometers. "This isn't a game," one soldier snorted. "If they couldn't do it, what chance does she have?" But the girl never flinched, never even blinked at the ridicule. She lowered herself to the ground, the desert dust rising around her, and slid the massive rifle into position. The world seemed to shrink around her as she settled behind the scope. Heat shimmered in the air, distorting the horizon. The target, so far away it was nearly invisible to the naked eye, wavered like a ghost. She slowed her breathing, steady and deliberate, recalling the teachings of legends like Carlos Hathcock, the Marine sniper whose patience had once brought down enemies at impossible distances. She adjusted for wind drift, felt the thinness of the air, and let numbers and instinct flow together like water. The soldiers fell silent. There was something in the way she moved, focused, unshakable, that commanded respect without words. Even the range officer leaned forward, binoculars pressed tight, his earlier doubt now tempered by curiosity. Her finger rested on the trigger, steady as stone. The desert went quiet, as if the earth itself held its breath. The shot cracked like thunder. The recoil slammed back into her shoulder, but she absorbed it with practiced ease. A bullet cut through the desert air, spinning across 4,200 meters of emptiness. 10 seconds stretched into an eternity. Soldiers held their breath, eyes glued to the distant ridge. Then gong! The faint but unmistakable ring of steel echoed across the range. Gasps erupted. The range officer lowered his binoculars, jaw open. One shot, one impossible hit. The murmurs turned into shouts of disbelief. "No way, that's luck!" a Marine stammered. But the girl was already adjusting her scope again. She didn't argue. She didn't boast. She simply chambered another round, another crack of thunder, another breathless wait, another echoing gong, and then a third. 3 perfect shots! No excuses, no flukes. The impossible wasn't just proven, it was repeated, and now undeniable. The silence that followed was heavier than the desert heat. Men who had mocked her now stood frozen, respect carving lines into their expressions. The range officer finally lowered his binoculars and exhaled a long, shaky breath. "Gentlemen," he said softly, voice carrying through the still air, "remember this day. We just witnessed history." The quiet girl rose, dusting the sand from her uniform. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply slung her rifle across her back and walked away, leaving behind a stunned crowd and 3 ringing steel plates at 4,200 meters. For the rest of their lives, the soldiers would tell the story of the day they saw a corporal step out from the shadows and hit a target thought to be untouchable. Her name became whispered alongside Kyle, Hathcock and Harrison, not as an imitation, but as a legend in her own right. And though she never spoke of it, the truth burned in their minds. Courage wasn't about volume or bravado. It was about stepping forward when the world doubted you most and letting a single shot silence everything. The desert sun burned high over the NATO training grounds, its glare bouncing off the steel targets that shimmered on the far ridge like mirages. Rows of Marines and British soldiers lined up behind their rifles, one by one taking turns to prove their skill. The challenge was legendary, a target more than 2.5 miles away. Men who had served in combat, men who had medals pinned to their chests, men who swore their marksmanship was unmatched. All of them fired, and all of them failed. 15 attempts, 15 misses. Not even close. The range officer let the silence stretch, then shook his head and laughed bitterly. "Any snipers here at all?" His voice cut through the dry air, half mocking, half daring. The soldiers exchanged glances. Some chuckled nervously, others tightened their lips in frustration. A few muttered excuses about the wind, the haze, the heat rising off the desert floor. Then, from the back of the group, a single hand rose. It was a girl, quiet, almost unnoticed until now. She stepped forward with a kind of calmness that silenced even the laughter. She wasn't tall, she wasn't broad-shouldered, and she carried herself with no bravado. Yet there was something in her stride that felt unshakable, something that demanded attention even without words. The soldiers shifted. One whispered, "She can't be serious." Another smirked and said, "Kyle, Harrison, those names are legends. No way she's even close." Chris Kyle, the Navy SEAL sniper, had earned his reputation in war. Craig Harrison, the British sharpshooter, had set a record with a shot over 2 kilometers. Both names were spoken with awe and respect, and both were invoked now as proof that this young woman didn't belong in their league. But she didn't argue. She didn't even respond. She simply laid down her weapon, the British-made Accuracy International L115A3, its long barrel glinting beneath the scorching light. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from. And if you love these stories, hit subscribe now. The next one will blow your mind, and it's even crazier. The range officer squinted at her, half amused, half intrigued. "Private," he muttered, "you know what you're asking for?" "That's over 4,000 meters." She didn't answer. Instead, she slid the bipod into the sand, checked her scope, and adjusted her position with deliberate precision. The murmurs behind her grew louder. Some mocked, some doubted, but others, those who noticed the steadiness of her movements, fell into silence. The desert stretched wide and unforgiving. Heat shimmered, turning the distant target into a flickering phantom. The wind shifted unpredictably, a constant trickster. Yet her breathing slowed. Her mind drifted to the stories she had studied. Stories of Carlos Hathcock, the Marine sniper who once crawled for days to take one decisive shot. She remembered Lyudmila Pavlichenko, Lady Death, who carved her name into history with hundreds of confirmed kills in World War II. Legends, yes, but legends had been human once. And humans had always been underestimated before they made history. The first crack of the rifle thundered across the valley. Recoil hammered into her shoulder, but she absorbed it cleanly, her cheek never leaving the stock. The soldiers stood frozen, binoculars raised, hearts thumping. The bullet cut across 4,200 meters of air, traveling further than most believed possible. Time stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. Then it came, the faintest metallic clang drifting back on the breeze. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some gasped, some swore. A few refused to believe it, shaking their heads violently. No, that was luck. Pure luck. The range officer's hands trembled as he steadied his binoculars. "Do it again," he whispered under his breath. The girl had already chambered the next round. No hesitation. Her focus didn't waver. She accounted for the shifting wind, adjusted her angle, and fired again. The rifle roared. Another wait, another stretch of silence, and then clang. Louder this time, as if the desert itself wanted no one to doubt. The laughter that had once filled the air was gone, replaced with stunned silence. Men who had boasted moments earlier now stood like statues, watching the impossible unfold. But she wasn't finished. Calmly, methodically, she loaded her third round. Her eyes never left the scope. Her breath slowed. Her fingers squeezed. The crack split the air, the long wait followed, and for the third time, the sound of steel being struck drifted back, undeniable, irrefutable. The range officer lowered his binoculars slowly, his face pale with shock. His earlier ridicule had vanished, replaced by awe. Around him, Marines and British soldiers stood in disbelief, struggling to reconcile what they had just seen. The girl didn't smile. She didn't boast. She simply rose, brushed the sand from her uniform, and slung her rifle across her shoulder. Without a word, she turned and began walking back toward the line of soldiers. As she passed, the silence broke, not into laughter, not into mockery, but into quiet respect. A few straightened their stances, unconsciously saluting her as though she had just rewritten the laws of possibility before their eyes. For years they would tell the story. They would describe how, after 15 misses from the best shooters among them, a quiet girl stepped forward, took a rifle, and struck 3 impossible shots at 4,200 meters. Her name would be spoken in hushed tones, compared not as a shadow of Kyle Hathcock or Harrison, but as a name standing alongside them. A reminder that legends aren't born. They are made in moments when the world doubts you most. And on that scorching desert range, under the weight of ridicule and disbelief, she carved her place in history with 3 shots that silenced everyone.